It is my privilege to be on such a distinguished panel. And I am grateful for this opportunity to share our work and my reflections on C4D here with all of you. In the 10 minutes I have, I would like to take a couple of minutes to briefly sketch out the history of our organization and the work we have done, and then use two specific ongoing initiatives that we are currently working on in order to frame the reflections and observations that I have on C4D practice. And then use the last minute or two of my time to raise a few questions for our discussion today. So at IAMCR Media Combined, we work on communication for social change and envision a world where all communities are empowered with communication skills, tools, and technologies, enabling them to access and use information as well as create and share knowledge with other communities locally and globally. IAMCR began its work in the mid-90s, looking to innovate with communication practice in partnership with communities, taking small and meaningful steps towards social change. When we began, I recall a particular incident in those very early days when we were called by a large development organization and introduced to their adolescent health program. The senior program manager said, "We would like you to develop comic books for young people. That will be an entertaining way to give them health information. And unfortunately, since the program closes this year, we would like these produced and implemented in the next 3 months." Now, I absolutely love comics, and I'm sure many young people do too. But there was something fundamentally wrong with the communication organization being called into the process towards the end of the development program, primarily to create only the communication materials with little time to research the design of the materials, let alone plan its value for the overall communication outcomes, not to speak of the development outcomes of the program. It is telling that we still get similar requests. Only now we are able to either resist such engagement or insist on a different approach. Communication was, and I dare say still remains, an afterthought when planning development, and I will try and share with you some of my thoughts on the problematic notion of development in just a few minutes. Our work at IAMCR has grown iteratively through working in India, South Asia, and beyond, from realizing the need for capacity building, participatory communication planning, and participatory evaluation, and thanks to Jo for talking about her work here, to advocating for and working with like-minded stakeholders towards creating an enabling political and social environment for community media in India. I'd like to share 2 examples from our work. Many of you may have heard of the floods that ravaged the northern state of Uttarakhand in India in June last year. There have been several discussions in the country regarding engaging community radio in disaster response. We have been working with 3 community radio stations in Uttarakhand for over 6 years and used the opportunity to engage with them in a dialogue on appropriate planning and action. However, we did not do this alone. We invited other civil society members from the environment movement that has been ongoing in Uttarakhand for many years into the process. The training and capacity sharing processes between the community radio groups, the environment protection activists, and NGOs led to discussions around why the disaster and the floods happened, what was climate change and how it was impacting the Himalayan belt, the building of large dams and roads that eat up the natural springs and forests. Are these really developing the region? What is at stake? Whose development are the large development projects for? The radio station reporters went into the field, engaged with their communities on these questions, and then worked with our support on scripts and radio program designs. 7 community radio stations in Uttarakhand today, together with 2 environment groups, form the Community Radio Consortium for Environment Protection. The radio stations are making long-form radio program series addressing several of these issues with titles that speak not just to the social, but the embedded political and power dynamics of what really caused the disaster last year. One radio program series is called In the Name of Development. Another is titled Water Lives Under the Tree with Broad Leaves. And a third, by an urban radio station, is called The City of My Dreams, questioning the unplanned construction in the Hill City. None of the programs the community radio stations are making in this first phase talk about disaster. In another more predictable scenario that many of us who know the C4D world can well imagine, all these stations would be making programs that provided information on pre, during, and post-disaster interventions, and what the community should or should not do in times of disaster. Another example from my ongoing work is the online platform called Community Media Munch and its associated mobile application. From nearly a decade of working with community radio stations across India, we found that the fastest learning curves happened when the radio stations' teams met each other. How could these learning opportunities be made more frequent and sustained? The Munch online and mobile-based application is designed to facilitate learning, collaboration, co-creation, and sharing. The radio stations are discovering what it means to collaborate and how they can train each other through a sharing of their broadcasting practice and community engagement tactics. Their dialogues are an exploration of each other's contexts and capacities, and they share content, but they also share ideas. In another, more predictable C4D scenario, new technology, the internet and the mobile, would be deployed for information dissemination and feedback, perhaps even deliver a training module. These predictable, alternate, and plausible scenarios would also have lent themselves better to impact assessments. The point I want to make through these two examples and the contradicting alternate scenarios is that if we recognize the tensions between community aspirations and development agendas, the dynamics of power and rights-based discourse, the ideas of freedoms, agency, and the citizens of a changing world, whether they live in the rural or urban spaces, then we will have to relook and redefine the values that embed the C4D work as it exists today. Another issue that I just want to raise very quickly is that the theory of communication for development continues to be rooted in its modernization genesis, despite repeatedly acknowledging the limitations of those approaches. As someone who is primarily working with communities and having had the privilege of engaging with many strands of communication, theoretical discourse, during my ongoing doctoral study, it has been liberating to tease out through my practice some of the tensions that prevent an adaptive framework. What I'm going to suggest may sound radical and provocative, but I ask, is it not time to move away from needs assessments and impact assessments and find a different way altogether to look at what we are doing and how well we are able to do it? Because to my mind, there are inherent power inequities in the design of these assessment methodologies, at least in the way they are currently practiced in large C4D programs supported and funded by big donor organizations. The word need itself is a derivative of the welfare state that takes away agency. And even if we were to coin a different word, it is how we work with communities to establish the processes of change through dialogue that matters. Secondly, perhaps we need to relook at the business of development that functions through RFPs and bids, which are neither transparent nor foster partnerships, but rather create vendors. Thirdly, and most importantly, should there not be flexibility and more scope for horizontal movement across the diverse parameters of development that are currently and have over the past been in vertical silos of health, education, livelihood, environment, etc., thereby crippling participatory planning and bottom-up approaches? Because, as has been said by speakers in various sessions yesterday, real life is not lived in these silos. And by treating these development goals as distinct and separate and trying to measure them as such, we force the agenda from the top rather than let it emerge from the bottom. Lastly, practicing theoretician or theorizing practitioner, the two need to meet, and only through collaborative action will we be able to work towards even a halfway adequate communication response to the changing world that we live in today. I want to close by recounting a meeting I had a few days ago. I met a senior ex-bureaucrat who's spearheading a significant political movement for democracy reforms in India, who said that while social change takes time, India does not have the luxury of time. I would like to echo his sense of urgency and say that the world does not have the luxury of time to realize the potential we know communication has for fostering social change. If only we stop treading old pathways, for it's always better to make new mistakes rather than repeat old ones. Thank you.